Hi everyone, it's me. Welcome to another video. Today we're just gonna chill, sit down, and chat a little bit. So this is one of those types of videos where you go grab a snack, come back, and enjoy. So for any of you who are wanting to get into fantasy or are just looking for a fantasy rec, this is the perfect video for you. I am going to be going through a bunch of different genres and giving you my fantasy recommendation based on like that genre. So like if you're into mystery thrillers, for example, I have fantasy recs for you. If you're into romances, I have fantasy recs for you. If you're into lit fic or classics, I have fantasy recs for you. So that's what we're gonna be doing today. Just one more thing before we get started. I am going to be introducing a spice meter of sorts in today's video because a couple of you guys requested this on my previous, I think, wrap-up video. Some of you were requesting for me to give all the books I mentioned a spice rating because some of you enjoy spice, some of you try and avoid spice, and so I think it's a good thing and hopefully a helpful thing to include in a video like this. So since it's my first time introducing my spice meter in this video, I have come up with a little system. I'm gonna do my spice ratings out of 5. For books that are 1 star, these are books that, you know, mention the act, they have some build up, maybe some foreplay included, but for the most part it fades to black. Like you will get that burning, pining tension, you will get a little bit of the warm up into it, you know what I mean. But in terms of like the act itself, it's like mostly fade to black, so those will be 1 spice. 2 spice is something I'm going to give to books where I would call it classy spice. This is probably the spice level that I prefer. You get a little bit of the act, but the language is kept classy. You know, it's not vulgar, it's done kind of in a more modest way, but you still get that scene. You know what I mean? 3 stars I'm gonna give to just like average spicy books. You've got the spice, it's a bit vulgar, it's a bit detailed. 3 stars is gonna be for an average spicy book. 4 stars I'm gonna give to books that were maybe a little bit too much for me, and for books that, you know, I'm like, maybe just keep a couple things a secret, keep a few things more of a mystery. And for 5 spices, I'm gonna use that for books that are just like way too much for me. It's like, no, this is too much, whether it's the amount of spice or the level of spice. It's just, nah, I ended up skimming it. Not for me. So that's gonna be my spice rating. And I know that spice is something that everyone has a different opinion on. Some people prefer spice, some people prefer different types of spice, but this is gonna be my ranking system, okay? But that being said, let's get into some fantasy recs. So we're gonna get started with the mystery thriller category. So if you are a mystery thriller fan, the first fantasy I would recommend to you is The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. This is a standalone, so really, really great, especially if you're a beginner into fantasy and like really don't feel like getting into too big of a series. This would be absolutely perfect for you. This book I feel like could also be classified more as magical realism versus like full fantasy. We are set in a real world setting. I forget where our characters live actually, but I'm pretty sure it's like a made up town, but like in a real like earth setting. But there's just like a little bit of magic, a little hint of magic. And so this book follows June Farrow, as said in the title, who is a young woman. She is the only daughter of her family, and her family is kind of like a line of females, essentially. There's not really any like male father figures around in their family. The women in this family get born and the men all leave. They live in a small town. It's like a small farming town, very, very religious. And the Farrow family, there's just something about them. The church doesn't really trust them. There's something a little off about these women in this family. I think at the beginning of the book, she lives with her grandmother. She was raised by her grandmother because at a young age, June's mother all of a sudden just disappeared into thin air. No one knows where she went. She just disappeared. At the beginning of the book, June finds this mysterious photo of someone who looks like her mother and this man who got murdered many, many years ago. She finds a letter and a photo, and it just kind of like starts her on this mystery case. She has to figure out what happened. She has to know why her mother knew this man, and yeah, tries to also figure out like where the heck she ran off to all those years ago. So there's a murder mystery, there's a missing persons case, and there's a little bit of magic twisted in. And this book is just so moody, it's so vibey. It's one of those books where like when you're reading it, you have no idea what's going on and your brain is just working so hard trying to figure out what the heck is going on, which is something that I love when reading mystery or thriller books. So that's why I think The Unmaking of June Farrow would be perfect for the mystery thriller lover who just wants to dive into a little bit of magic. The next one I'd recommend to you if you are a mystery thriller lover is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. There is a bit more magical aspect in this book. It's also an unfinished series, so there are 2 books so far out in the series, and I think there's going to be a 3rd coming out. But this book follows a girl named Alex who grew up, I don't know, she was never very well off, so when she was in her teenage years, she got mixed up into drugs and dealing and all this bad stuff. She dropped out of school. She was never a great kid, and this big tragedy happens around her, which brings her to the hospital. And while she's recovering, the dean from Yale comes to visit her, and he's like, hey, I could make use of you. I will give you full tuition to Yale if you come and we can use your skills to watch over the secret societies of Yale University. And so Alex is like, well, yeah, like I have nowhere to go in life. So like if you're giving me free tuition to Yale, yes, I'm coming. I will do whatever you want. So Alex goes to Yale and she gets embedded into this world of secret societies, of magic. She starts to like figure out more about herself as well. Growing up, she always had this like weird intuition. She could basically see dead people, like she could see ghosts, and she never really understood it growing up. Like no one around her could do what she could do, and like no one understood her, and she just thought she was crazy. But yeah, she goes to Yale. She realizes that there's this whole world out here and that her little skill can come in handy. So that's Ninth House, and I feel like this one is definitely more like dark academia fantasy, but there is like a mystery, kind of a thrillery feel. I think this book is a little bit more like gory, but yeah, if you're into kind of like darker books, I think you would love this. And then the 3rd one I would recommend to the mystery thriller lover, if you are looking for more of like a big high fantasy book, I would recommend One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This one, honestly, I wouldn't say it's a thriller, but I put it in this category because it does have a bit of a darker, mysterious vibe. We're in a world that's covered in mist, so like it's just dark. We're set in a world or a town called Blunder, and this town is kind of cursed. So there are mists that are around. Everyone has been told to fear the mists, so everyone just kind of like stays back from it, because if you go into the mist, you get this fever, and then you can get like magical powers from it, which are actually banned. So if you go into the mists, you get the fever, you get sick, and you get magic, you actually get executed. So that's the world we're in. We follow a girl named Elspeth who has some secrets. She actually got the fever from the mists as a child, but her family did a really good job at keeping her and her fever a secret. So she's kind of been able to stay hidden, stay safe. And she has this like demon in her head essentially that haunts her, or not haunts her, like it just like talks to her and it tells her things. So that's her main character, and the family we're in is somewhat of a noble family. So at the beginning of the book, we get brought to this, I forget what type of event it was, but it was some sort of like a ball event for nobility. And Elspeth, while she tries to stay on the down low, obviously is not successful and gets found out and gets introduced to this whole other crew and this whole mission. There is a really cool magic system in this book. It's so unique. I love it. I've read so many fantasies, and I feel like this magic system is one of the most unique I've ever read. The main like source of magic is through these cards. So there are like 12 different cards. They're called Providence cards, and they grant whoever touches the card a certain power. But you can't use the power for too long, because every power also comes with like a negative side effect, because magic has to stay in balance. So if you have extra power, you're gonna get like a pretty nasty side effect from it. So people use magic kind of, they'd use it in smaller doses because they have to like control it. But yeah, the cards are really cool. So if you're into like a darker kind of a mood, definitely One Dark Window. This is a duology, by the way, and it is complete. Everything's released, so you can read 2 books, you'd be done. Okay. Next up, for the historical fiction lover, because I'm also a historical fiction lover, you need to read The Poppy War. So The Poppy War is a trilogy, and it is a high fantasy again, so we are set in another world, but we are basically set in China. We have Japan in this book, and we have the UK in this book, and the 3 are at war pretty much. This trilogy is actually loosely based on a real world war, like in history, which is why I think you would love this if you're a historical fic lover. But we follow Rin, who is from like the southern provinces of, I don't even remember what the world was called. it's China, essentially. She comes from like a more poor province. It's called the Rooster province in this world. And people in this province, they don't really go anywhere. They're farmers. They're just not wealthy. But Rin wants more for herself. So she applies for this military school and she actually gets in. She opens up all these new doors for her. She trains really hard, but there's also a lot of horrors involved too, because we are in a state of war in this universe, and so she's at the military school. She's going to be sent to the war, and so this trilogy spans over many years. There are a lot of like dark, horrific things that happen in this book, so maybe check trigger warnings. This book absolutely broke me, but it's incredible, and I'm not going to tell you more because I don't want to spoil anything, but this is like literally one of my favorite fantasy series ever at this point, and so I highly recommend, but definitely be ready for traumatic events to occur. And then if you just want a standalone historical fiction type fantasy, I would recommend Weyward by Emilia Hart. We follow another like very female oriented family similar to the Unmaking of June Farrow, where we follow 3 generations of women in the same family. The first timeline is like from the 1600s, so like a long time ago. One is from like 1800s maybe, or like early 1900s, and then the third timeline is more like present day. And yeah, we just follow these women as they kind of like look into their family past, realize that their families have a history of like witchiness, and kind of deal with that, try and hide it or try and embrace it. It's really good, and it's a standalone, so it's great. I would also recommend The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I read this so long ago and I don't remember the details about it, but I remember that I love this book so much. We follow this girl named Addie LaRue. She starts out in France, like a small village in France. She comes across this like demon type character, grants her one wish for whatever reason, I don't remember. And she wishes for something, but of course the demon twists around the words of her wish, and instead of giving her like actually what she wants, he basically curses her. And basically her curse is everyone forgets her. So she can walk into a room, she'll meet everyone, she'll introduce herself to everyone, but then the second she walks out of the room, everyone forgets her. So everyone remembers her until she leaves. But like, let's say she's in a room talking to people, she leaves and goes to the bathroom and comes back, everyone that she just met is going to forget her. So this is the curse that Addie LaRue lives with, and she struggles with this. It's so good. I think it's a little bit slower paced, but it's so moody and vibey. I have very fond memories of reading this book. And then the last book I'm going to recommend to you, historical fiction girlies or gentlemen, is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I'm gonna be honest, this wasn't my favorite book, but I'm still gonna recommend it because I still think it's worth a read, and I feel like some people may like this book more than I did. But this book is set in Spain during the Spanish Golden Age. We follow a girl named Lucia who is a maid of a noble, kind of a poorer noble house. She works as a maid and she has a little bit of magic, and this one is a little bit witchy as well. I feel like a lot of historical fiction fantasies are a little bit witchy just because it's like easy to tie in witchiness to history because it's actually like a part of real history, you know? But Lucia is a little bit witchy. She doesn't really flaunt it though. She tries to hide it, obviously, but she basically uses her little witchy powers to help her get through the day easier, whether it's to save a piece of burnt bread or to like clean things a little bit quicker. Like she just uses little tricks. One day, however, her mistress finds her, discovers her using magic, and then she decides that she's going to use Lucia to help her elevate herself on the social ladder because she wants to climb a bit higher in society. She's not where she wants to be. But then this opens a whole can of worms because now Lucia is being exposed to many more people than she was in the past, and her secret's kind of out, and it's only a matter of time before she gets caught. So she gets whisked away into all these tournaments, kingly things, and that is The Familiar. And I enjoyed this book. I say it wasn't my favorite because I'm a huge fan of Leigh Bardugo, and this just wasn't my favorite book from her, but I still enjoyed reading it. I feel like this book was very strong in terms of the vibe and atmosphere, but the plot and the pacing of the story is like what kind of threw me off a bit. But again, I would totally still recommend it because it was still a very entertaining read. But that's The Familiar. We're gonna move to lit fic / classics now, and these were kind of a little more difficult for me to pick because if you know me, I'm not really like a lit fic fic classics girl. It's not the genre that I gravitate towards, but I picked two for you. The first one is Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia Faeries by Heather Fawcett. This is a cozier fantasy. This is one in a series. It's very like fairy, fae. And the first book follows Emily Wilde, who is a researcher of fairies. She studies at, I believe it's Cambridge. In the first book, she goes to this made up little town. It's some sort of like Scandinavian type little village, very snowy, very wintry and cozy. And she goes to this village to study the fairies there. And she's just researching to finish her encyclopedia that she's working on. That's the start of her journey. You know, she encounters these fae. Some of them are more dangerous than they seem. The style of writing is also really interesting. The entire book is basically Emily Wilde's journal. So as she's writing her encyclopedia, she's also keeping this journal on the side where she documents her experiences, writes like her thoughts on the things that happened. So you're basically reading her journal while you're reading this. And I feel like literary fiction / classics readers would love this because of the writing style. Like it read to me like a classic. It was very whimsical. I don't know, it just seemed very classics to me. And so if you're a classics lover but want a little hint of fantasy, I would recommend this. The second book I'm going to recommend to the lit fic classics is The Cruel Prince trilogy by Holly Black. This is a completed series, and this one, it's kind of fairy tale-y. It's very politic-y, but we follow a girl named Jude who is a human, but she lives in the fae world. And I feel like The Cruel Prince is very similar to the Emily Wilde book, but like it's just a little more high stakes and a little bit more exciting, I feel like. But in terms of the worlds and like the types of fae in these books, they're very similar. But The Cruel Prince follows Jude. She lives in the fairy world, but she's a human, which is very, very dangerous for her, but it's just where she grew up. It's where her family is. And without saying too much, she gets caught up in a bunch of the fairy politics. It's very whimsical, but it's also high stakes. So if you want something that seems a little bit more low stakes, I would say Emily Wilde. If you want something that's a little more high stakes, I would say The Cruel Prince. If you like dark academia, I have two for you. So the first one is Babel by R.F. Kuang, and this is a standalone, lucky you. But this follows a boy named Robin who was taken from China to the UK at a very young age. His family all died of, what was it? I'm forgetting everything again. But his family died from some sort of illness. So this mysterious academic man finds Robin and he's like, hey, you can live with me. I will take you in. I will like basically adopt you. I will take care of you, shelter you, give you food. All you have to do is study languages. So Robin's like, yes, I will. So he starts studying languages and then he ends up going to Oxford. This book, similar to the Poppy War, is based on kind of true real world history, but with a magical twist. So in this Babel world, people are normal, people are humans, but there is a little bit of magic and it's all held in, what is it? It's silver. So there's this whole manufacturing system at Babel where they make silver. And the way you like create magic from it is you use linguistics. You use translation. And I'm not going to explain the entire magic system to you, but it's very, very interesting. It's very, very clever, above my intelligence level. But this book is really, really good. And yeah, it's definitely a little bit dark academia-y because it is set at Oxford. But I would also say it's historical fic as well. So there's a little bit of overlap there. So that's Babel. And then just to bring it up again, if you are a dark academia person, I would also recommend Ninth House to You by Leigh Bardugo. And I'm not going to talk about it again because I just talked about it in the mystery thriller section of this video. So if you skipped that section, go find it. But yeah, Ninth House would also be really good for the dark academia lover as well, because obviously it's set in Yale. We spend a lot of time with the secret societies and everything. So yeah, for sure, good for the dark academia lover. And we're gonna move over to romance now. So I have a lot, so I'm gonna go through these really, really quick, okay? The first fantasy I'm gonna recommend for a romance lover is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is a duology that is complete, so all the books are out. This book I would recommend for the romance girlies that love rivals to lovers, that love letter writing, that are just like absolute romantics, like the romantics. romantics. Like, you love romance. You are a pure romance lover. You're not a smut lover. You're a romance lover. This is like peak romance fantasy, I would say. It's like so romantic. And it's definitely more romance than fantasy, I would say. So I would highly recommend Divine Rivals, especially if you are like very, very new to fantasy and just want to dabble a little bit into it. I feel like if I'm talking about romance and fantasy, I have to talk about ACOTAR, right? I'm not going to talk about it too much because I know everyone knows about this series at this point, but it's a staple. It's so good. It's my Roman Empire. And it is very involved because if you do start with Sarah J. Maas, you will have to read all 16 books of hers that are currently out. So I will give you that warning, but it's so worth it. It's so good. I think about these characters every single day. ACOTAR. There's also Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber for the romance lover. This is like more of a fairy tale romance, I would say. It's very fairy tale-y. It's very whimsical. It is YA as well, so it's a very quick and easy read. So although it is a trilogy, you could get through it so quick, I promise. So this is set in like a complete magical world called the Magnificent North. It's so fairy tale. There's like cozy cottages. There's like food that just appears every hour. Magical trees and forests. It's just so good. And Jackson Evangeline in this book just have my entire heart. I'm gonna have to give a little mention to Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros as well. This one is more of like a dragony fantasy romance. If you liked something like Divergent in the past, I would say Fourth Wing is right up your alley because there are a lot of similarities. Now the last one I'm going to recommend for the romance lover is Bride by Hazelwood, and this one is more of a paranormal romance versus a fantasy romance. But basically this is a vampire werewolf romance. But it's very funny. It's like a rom-com. It's not serious, and that's what I love about this one. The rest of my romance recommendations that I just talked about are very like serious romance, but this one's like funny. It's a rom-com. It's a vampire werewolf rom-com. It is hilarious. It makes jokes about itself. It's very self-aware. There is a physical spicy thing in this book that made me a little uncomfortable, but overall it was a really, really fun read. So yeah, I'd recommend this as well for the fantasy beginner who loves romance. And then the last category I'm going to talk about is just like full out fantasy. If you just want to like dive straight into like a big epic fantasy, I would say read Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. And again, this is going to get you into a whole universe, but this is a series that has 8 books. So it's a commitment, okay? But it's so good. How do I even describe it? I feel like if I describe the first book, Throne of Glass, like it doesn't even encompass like the entire series, not even a little bit. Like it's just so good. But okay, Throne of Glass follows an assassin named Selena. She was kind of captured and enslaved, but then she's taken from her mine where she's enslaved and brought to the royal palace or the royal castle, where she is selected to participate in these trials to win the chance to become the king's assassin and work for the king. So that's where Throne of Glass starts. I can't even talk about it. Like I'm gonna get emotional just talking about it. Like I said, ACOTAR was my Roman Empire. Throne of Glass is like the Roman Empire. So Throne of Glass. Another series I love is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This is a trilogy, but there is a spin-off series also coming off from it. So while the Darker Shade of Magic series is complete, it's still ongoing in the spin-off series, which is really fun. But yeah, this one is a little bit more grungy. It's a little bit more dark. We're set in, it's kind of a mixture of like real world and fantasy world, I guess, because we're set in London, but we have 4 different Londons because we have parallel universes. And so they're all the same layout, but they all have different levels of magic in them, and our main character is able to travel between the different Londons. But that's not something that everyone can do. He travels across the different Londons, but obviously there are political issues between the different Londons, and they come up and there's this whole big bad thing, and that's A Darker Shade of Magic, and it's so good. It's also one of my faves. There's also When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker, which is definitely a newer release. This is the first book of a trilogy, and there's only 1 book so far. So if you want to be in pain like me and sit on the edge of a cliff on a cliffhanger for I don't know how many years, then definitely start it. But I loved this world. It was just like one of the most magical worlds I had ever read about. And just to give you a quick little rundown of the world, just to get you inspired to read it, our world that we're in has dragons, first of all. Come on, like, you say the word dragon and I'm sold. But we also have a bunch of different moons in the sky, and these moons in the sky are actually crystallized dragons that went to die. Basically, it kind of sounds sad and morbid, but it's also magical at the same time. So basically, right before a dragon dies, like when it knows its life is coming to an end, whether it's like injured or it's old and it knows its time has come, it will fly to the sky and crystallize into a moon. So we have all these magical dragon moons in the sky, and I can just picture it, and it feels so magical in my brain, and I love it. Yeah, that's the world we're in. We have gods that also created this world, so each god has a different element. So there's like a space, like an air god, there's a water god, a fire god, you know the type. One for every element. And then some people in this world are able to hear the songs of these gods, and the people that can hear the songs of these gods can also use their powers, like channel their powers pretty much. So some people can hear one god, some people can hear two gods. Very rarely, some people can hear three gods, and some people can't hear any gods at all, sadly. But that is when the moon hatched, and it is so good. Who knows where the series will go, but I'm excited to keep reading on in this one. And the last book I'm going to talk about is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is, I don't think it's a standalone anymore, but I would argue that this book is a standalone, although it's a very long standalone. So it's about 800 something pages. It's just another epic fantasy with a lot of different warring kingdoms, different political systems, different religious beliefs. There are also dragons in this one. There's a lot of complicated stuff happening, and I always have issues trying to summarize this book, so I'm not gonna try and do it because I've tried it in the past and I don't think it was very successful. But we follow a couple different POVs in this book from different regions of the world as they try and come together, get over their warring politics and religious beliefs, and try and work together to get rid of this big bad dragon or power, pretty much. But yeah, another really, really good one. And those, I think, are all of my recommendations for you today. Yeah. That was my list. I need to drink some water because I've been talking a lot, but I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got a couple of fantasy recs out of this. This is the first time I'm doing this type of like recommendation sit down video, so if you liked it, definitely please leave me a like, and I will try to make more of these in the future. So yeah, if you did like this one, please leave me a like and a comment. If you don't know what to comment down below, let me know out of this list which book you would like to read, or if you have any other fantasy recs for the genres that I just talked about, leave them in the comments so we can all get recommendations together. But yeah, if you like me, subscribe, do that bell thing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!